We are at Rookwood Cemetery here in Sydney, just near my home, and this is a very, very sad part of the cemetery. There's a lot of unmarked graves, and the one in the upper quadrant of the screen, you can see the word George Facer near that blue cap. That is my poor old great-grandfather. He had a dog of a life. He had a dog of a life in England, and he had a very, very unfortunate life here in Australia. A lot of the family condemn him, but I have done a lot of research, and I feel that, well, they live with him. I didn't, but I feel for George because the research that I have done has revealed that he lived a real tough life, and it would have made him very, very hardened. Now, we see the details on George. George Facer was born on the 30th of August 1847 in Greater London. Actually, he was born in St Pancras, and that's in the Sounds of the Bow Bell, so he's right down near the London Bridge. He died in Sydney on the 3rd of June 1906. A poor old bugger was only 58 years old and probably worn out. He actually died in the Prince Alfred Hospital, the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital here in Camperdown. He's buried at the Rookwood Cemetery here in the Cumberland Council area. Poor old fella's buried in grave number 8703 in section T, and it is a no owner. It is not a pauper's grave, but they don't know who owns it. So apparently somebody must have paid for him to be buried there. I have been told if I'd like to purchase it, I can, but I have to notify all the living descendants of George to get their approval for me to purchase the grave. And at this point in time, I think that is one job far too difficult. Now, this photo shows you where George left. The yellow dot with the red arrow is where George Facer was living at the time, 80 Booth Street in Annandale. And as I mentioned there, he left for Prince Alfred Hospital from that address, and he died in 1906. Now, the interesting thing about this character was that 3 years prior to this, his wife had died at the asylum in Silverwater in Western Sydney. It was a, what would you call it, a homeless women's shelter that was transferred from Hyde Park in Sydney. Anyway, on the death certificate of George, she is mentioned as his wife, married in Melbourne. I've never been able to find any trace of that marriage. I do think that was probably a common law marriage, and I do thank Angeline for looking after George in his final days. Obviously, she was there at his death when he was in the RPA, and that's kind of good. Now, at the time, or a little bit later actually, the only record I could find of probably a voters list, to be quite honest, and she lived basically across the road from where George lived in Annandale. The home at 80 Booth Street is now, well, it was when I was down there quite a few years ago now, it's an optician's shop.